So a couple things. I'm Kevin Geiger. I'm going to be one of your co-presenters this afternoon on this project. And you are here for the Building Smart webinar. Hopefully that's the correct place you want to be. And this is a joint presentation by the Mount-Scottney Regional Commission, the Two Rivers Ottaquechee Regional Commission, and the Upper Valley Lake Sunapee Regional Planning Commission. A couple of Zoom items before we begin. We're going to take questions kind of as we go, but through the chat, just to try for efficiency's sake, because we just have an hour. So down bottom, if you move your cursor down bottom of your screen, there's a little bubble that says chat in the bottom, and you can type in there. And Tori up here will be monitoring the chat, and we'll jump in every now and then with a chat question. So don't feel like you have to hold it if there's something that comes to mind. And again, we're trying to take mainly brief questions versus comments and stuff. You're welcome to put in comments or links or other things in the chat, and we will be archiving that as well. As Tori mentioned just a second ago, we are live on the internet, so we are streaming on Facebook, this thing, and we're also recording it, so you can come back later and watch the darn stuff. If you're not presenting, actually keep your mic on mute, and you can leave your picture on or you can leave it off. Either way, it's okay. So I'm just gonna move this bit on over so I can see a bit more what I'm up to here. Okay, and so again, I'm Kevin Geiger. I'm with the Two Rivers Ottaquechee Regional Commission. And Alex, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Alex Belenz. I'm with the Upper Valley Lake Sunapee Regional Planning Commission. We cover the New Hampshire side of the greater Upper Valley region, including most of Sullivan County and the kind of greater Lake Sunapee area.
Excellent. And so we cover northern Windsor, most of Orange, and then Mark is down. So the area we're talking about, and when we call the valley, or is our 67 town joint area. And let's see, let's just start right off the bat. And so this project is part of the outcome of the Keys to the Valley project, which has been our couple-year joint housing project, which is not only looking at our housing need, but what are we going to do about it? And what can you do about it? And how do you actually do those things? So this is our main website, and we're not going to go into the website a whole lot, but you can go here, you can find all sorts of things. The most important part of the website, though, is that beginning is that we're in a housing crisis. That is what gets you to do stuff. You know, it's not a little problem over there we'll get to sometime. This is an emergency for lots of people in their lives right now, and it's not getting better. The whole pandemic stuff has made it worse out there. And I think the next slide is yours, Alex.
Yeah, and so if you go to our website, it's keystothevalley.com, we have a lot of information regarding the results of our different studies and analyses. We've got a toolbox of strategies that communities and partners can apply to addressing some of these challenges. There's quite a bit of information. But we did want to present one of our kind of key findings. And so one of our key tasks was to basically take a look at present housing demand and affordability, and then try to look ahead a decade and see how things might look in 10 years. And there are some pretty worrying trends that came out of this analysis, both in terms of demand and affordability. So at present, about 1/3 of our households are cost burden, which means that they pay 30% or more of their total household income to their housing costs. And right now that's about 23,600 households in this 67 town region. And we know that the short supply of housing contributes to this affordability challenge to some extent. Over the next decade, we estimate that there will be about 10,000 more households that come into the region. And that means at minimum, we need to add about 10,000 more homes over the next decade just to keep pace with that new demand. In comparison, over the previous decade, we added 4,000 homes. So there's going to need to be some changes there to keep pace with that demand. And at current rates, by 2030, we'll have about 26,000 cost burden households. So that indicates some additional needs around creating new homes and affordability programs. So we have not really been on a great track for some time now. And then, as Kevin mentioned, with the impacts of the pandemic, causing people to come into our region, that has exacerbated some of these long-term trends. We also are facing kind of the specter of additional migration to the region as a result of climate impacts elsewhere in the country. And this is something that has been covered by VPR, New York Times recently. And recently, we're also seeing an increased number of real estate companies competing with private residents to purchase homes on the private market. So it's a challenge we're experiencing from all sides right now. It's a fairly urgent problem and will require some new thinking and some hard work.
And so all challenges are opportunities, right? You can look at them that way. So this is a classic planning challenge. It's not something new for those of us in the planning world. It's just a different scale and a different urgency, I would say. But the tools we're going to talk about today are tools that every town has, and hopefully most towns are using. And we're going to talk about how you can maybe use them a little more. It's certainly, we all believe that we can solve this issue and solve it in a way that still meets our other needs, which we're going to talk about today, is that those bigger things. So it's not just housing, but how do you do that smartly so you meet everything out there and reap the benefits thereof. I think that's it for me. Yep.
Yeah, so our title of our event today was Building Smart for Stronger Communities. And so what we're really looking at today is how we can make our communities stronger while adding new homes. And there are many, many different ways you could define the strength of a community. But as planners, we like metrics. So we're picking a couple of key ones here. And those would be tax base, affordability, and quality of life are three key metrics for defining a strong community. So through the process of adding new housing, we want to think about keeping the tax base strong, maintaining or improving affordability, and ensuring that those quality of life factors are preserved or improved. And this is not meant to be a comprehensive overview today of all things related to housing and community development. We cover many more topics on keystothevalley.com, such as supportive housing, unsheltered populations, the role of employers, those types of things. Today, our big focus is going to be on the topic of creating new homes and building community strength. So we'll come back to these metrics at a few points throughout the presentation. So to start, I'm just going to start really high level and just take a look at the types of homes that we already have in our communities. So in this region, this might be the type of image that a lot of us think of when we think of a home. We think of kind of the big, beautiful home in the beautiful rural pastoral setting. And we certainly have vast rural areas in this region. But we should keep in mind that relatively few of us actually live in a setting that looks like this. So we have folks who are living in kind of small duplex type units, small multi-unit homes. We have folks who are living in small manufactured homes. We have folks who are living in some of our downtown and village centers in either multi-family homes or single family homes or apartments. We have some small clustered communities in rural settings like this Black River Commons in Cavendish, Vermont. We have some kind of creative arrangements as well. So this is what's referred to as a like a bungalow court. We have a couple of these around the region, kind of small intentional communities created around shared space. We have mobile home parks that provide a lot of our market rate affordable housing in the region. We have small village centers that have single family homes, apartment buildings. And we have some more dense and built up town and city centers that have apartments, townhomes, accessory dwellings, and other kind of denser structures. So all that to say, there are a variety of housing types that we need to think of when we're thinking about homes, both present and future. And that will kind of inform how we think about the process of adding new homes.
So how can we do it? We're going to talk about that here. We're talking about kind of the pieces that for those of us in the land use field that we look at. The first off is, do we have the space? And the answer is yes. We have loads and loads and loads of space. We don't want to use all that space because other things need the space, like water and animals and stuff like that. So, but we have lots of space, and we're going to drill down on that a little bit deeper. And do we have the infrastructure? Yeah, we've got a lot of the infrastructure. So I think the next slide, we talk about infrastructure. Oh, no, we talk about space. And so one of the things that we did in terms of looking at space, so in that first slide, where Alex was talking about the need, where we say thousands of homes, 10,000 homes or whatever, we don't want you to all think we're talking building, 1,000 home towers and stuff. For a lot of our communities, we can build at the scale that they have built at, but just fit in more places. And so this is down in Chester. And what we did here is we bottled some new buildings in spots in existing. And so here you can see we've added 2 new structures, one behind the church steeple and one right behind the church there. But one's a single family, one's a duplex. And so right here we can put in units without, tearing anything down on an existing lot space. And we can do this in many of the neighborhoods in the region. And so we have a few more examples of just kind of showing you this build out. This is up in Wilder. This is kind of the Depot Street. There's the post office on the left, Route 5 running through the middle. And again, we looked at this area. And so we have added here, I think 12 units all in all. Is that right? 12, yeah, 12 units. By putting one up there on Route 5, one over on the side street, a couple of little accessory dwelling units, and turning one of the existing homes into a duplex. Some of the homes that you see in this picture are already buildings that have been broken up into duplexes or triplexes, or in fact, the far one in the back right behind that arrow is a 5-unit house. But it looks just like a big old house. And so when we talk multifamily housing, you don't need to think something that looks like a big box apartment building. It can just look like a white clapboard house that just kind of has extended parts. So, and even throughout this neighborhood, we looked at the whole neighborhood. We were able to fit almost 30 units into this neighborhood at the scale and the size and the type that's already there. And that's just one little neighborhood in one part of a town. And so you can imagine across the region, we can fit hundreds, if not thousands, of homes in existing places like this. But it may take a little work on the regulatory side to make that happen.
Kevin,
yes.
We have a question from Liz Ryan Cole. She's wondering if you have any advice for addressing planning boards that worry about massing, which is they don't like the aesthetics of larger buildings.
Yeah, so you can deal with that in a couple ways. One of the ways is kind of something that's a little newer in the planning field, which is what we call form-based code, where instead of worrying about how many units are in the structure, you worry about the structure. And so, for example, that one up on Route 5 there in Wilder there, we built that as a 6-unit structure. It could be a 3-unit structure. It could be 12 units of micro units. If you have sewer and water, who cares in some ways how many units go inside there? And but you're more worried about the shape. And so you may want to be talking about gabled roofs. Gabled roofs do drive up the price of a house compared to a flat roof on a larger building. And you may want to talk about windows, that windows are taller than wide. You may want to talk about siding. You may want to talk about those other things. All of those do have impacts on cost. And so if you're building the bigger buildings, you can drive down the price of cost through certain treatments on the outside. So be aware of that tussle around there. But you may also have commercial areas where the commercial buildings are of a certain shape that are maybe a little more like some of the housing, the larger housing that we see out there. But yeah, you can deal with all that. Just be aware that there, again, are push-pulls in any of those issues.
And there's a follow-up question. Susan says, and then there's how to fit in a car per adult. So I'm assuming parking requirements.
Yeah, we'll talk about parking a little bit, and especially in one of the upcoming seminars where we talk about actual land use regulations. That's one of those things where we suggest that you drive down the parking requirement. That you don't say, okay, we're going to assume every unit has 2 cars with it. Maybe assume that there's 1 car with it. Maybe assume that there's some place where those cars can go that's not on your lot. For a lot of commercial structures, their lots are busy during the day. A lot of residents are busy during the night. You can share those lots across that way. You don't have to build them. And other places, there is sufficient public parking, and some people just don't have cars. So if you're in one of these places here, you can actually walk to a transit stop. You never need to go actually get in a car to go to the store or to the doctor or anything like that. And you know, we're having an increasing number of households that don't own a car out there. So what we're trying to do on the car side is don't worry about that too much. People will somewhat self-select. If they don't have a great big 3-car garage and they've got 3 cars, then they won't be buying that place, right? Okay. I think, yeah, Alex got the next one.
Yeah, and so wanted to take this exercise and apply it in a different context, kind of within an existing developed area, not just within a neighborhood, but also, you know, what of our commercial areas. So I think a lot of people are kind of familiar with the kind of predictions or debate about the future of retail, particularly big box retail, and how viable that will be going forward. And then there's also some considerations about, you know, if that is the best and most efficient use of land and what kind of tax, you know, benefits you get as a municipality from hosting this. So we wanted to think about, you know, how could you revision an area like this to not only be a commercial center, but also provide housing in a way that is appealing and efficient. So this is, folks will probably be familiar with the Miracle Mile Plaza in Lebanon. So I'm just going to back up a second. We have quite a bit of parking in here. If you drive by here regularly, as I do, you'll know that this parking lot is rarely more than half full. And so that is available land that could be put to more productive use than an empty parking lot in our view. And so in a lot of these areas, you can take advantage of things like existing water and sewer infrastructure, connections to existing public transit routes, and proximity to retail and employment. And so what we've been able to do here is envision adding 20 or 30 new homes, as well as additional commercial or nonprofit space, creating a pedestrian only area that could be a gathering place or a place for outdoor dining if there's going to be restaurants or coffee shops or things like that in there. And then it even connects nicely to the greenway that goes through here in Lebanon, as well as the transit stop. So these are things to think about too. And part of this is thinking about things like zoning regulations in commercial districts and what permitted uses are, and things like parking requirements. Because, you know, there's maybe better ways to make more efficient use of that space if you can be more flexible on what needs to be parking and what can be set aside for development.
Right, and in this one, Alex, too, we haven't increased impervious area at all. So, you know, again, when we're building new things, we don't need to be furthering other problems. We're also built down to the floodplain. There's no floodplain involved in this particular example. That's all in the back. And we're pulling the buildings towards the road, which is the traditional form of buildings. Is not a great big parking lot with a building in the back, but the buildings are in the road. The parking is somewhere where you don't really need to be seeing it all the time. In this case, with that pedestrian mall in the back, it would be shaded by the 2 structures in front. So we create some kind of quieter space. It's off the street and it's got some shade in there too. Could be a nice spot.
And one other thing, just to kind of button up these visualizations, is, you know, we've been talking a lot about adding homes within our developed areas at the scale of development that's already occurred. And that's not to say that there aren't areas kind of on the periphery of our village centers and downtowns that couldn't support new homes. But you gain a lot of advantages of looking at and enabling opportunities to develop within the core, such as connections to existing infrastructure, tying into the transportation network, especially if there's public transportation or sidewalks available, using land that's already been cleared or developed to some extent, and being able to build as a result of a lot of those factors at greater density to create more homes. So there's a lot of advantages to being able to look inward within our existing neighborhoods and commercial cores.
And I just saw a chat pop up regarding that project. So all of our build out examples are our examples. They are examples of what you can do in a place. They're not examples of what somebody wants to do, what a developer has proposed, anything like that. So they're just an example. You know, we didn't go ask Price Chopper like, hey, would you like us to fill in your parking lot? They're meant to be food for thought so that people can go, oh, I can see an example of a project now. You know, maybe you'd want to do that or something else. But that there is lots of room out there at the scale where we have existing buildings. So this one is, do we have the infrastructure? And yeah, we have the infrastructure. Far and away, our road network is built, you know, for those of you who go on the interstate, we have lots and lots of road infrastructure. It is basically impossible to make our road infrastructure reach a level of failure by putting growth into it with all the expected growth we have. So we have lots of that stuff. We do have sidewalks in many areas. We don't have them in probably all the areas we need, but we have a lot of sidewalks out there. We've got decent public transit inside the core area, although we could increase routing, you know, there so that you don't wait as long. Again, that just takes a little money and stuff. And we have sewer and water. Our sewer and water systems are a little older, but we have capacity in general there. It's not a capacity issue, it's more an upkeep issue of those systems. And if you have those areas, why not use them? So instead of you get done all the work, you know, this is a 2-lane highway. Well, I don't know what it costs now. It probably costs a lot more. But a 2-lane highway costs you roughly, several years ago, it cost you $10 million a mile to build. You know, it costs you $1 million a mile just to pave the interstate. Again, when you see them out there paving, all of that infrastructure has been paid for. Let's use it and maximize that value by putting houses in here where we can. And again, using, like, there's that big yellow place to the right there. I don't know what's in there, but if that was a private home or that blue place down in the corner, obviously those could be, you know, 3-4 units out there. Because again, our households are driving smaller. I just had an email this morning about somebody with a small house. That is the demographic that we have. More and more 1 unit, 2 units are needed out there, not great big homes. That's not what the demographics really drive right now.
And one other quick point regarding water and sewer is, you know, with modern septic requirements and things of that nature, to be able to build at a density of units that would support, you know, this type of development that you're seeing in here, it really can't be done unless you are connected to public sewer in particular. And many developers won't build at that scale unless they can connect to public water systems. So if you don't have that, you are looking at typically larger lot sizes and more kind of development on the periphery, which again, there's appropriate places for that. But makes it more difficult to build at scale when you're thinking about adding needed homes.
Yeah, and I think we can go to the next slide. I'll just keep chatting. On sewer and water, we do advocate a lot of our villages that don't have sewer and water be looking at that. And of course, we're advocating up the line to the state and the feds for additional funding along those lines. You couldn't build a bunch of our existing villages at the scale they're built at. You couldn't build what's there right now with the current sewer and water rules. It's just, they're just grandfathered in. And so we probably even have unsafe conditions on the ground now that would benefit from at least public water going into many of these places. So here, I'm just going to move this thing over here a little bit so I can see that. Yep. So now we're going to talk about how you do this thing. And we've almost gone backwards in how we usually do this. You know, usually as we're planners are always thinking about, you do the plan and the zoning, and then you build the thing. And so we began with the thing you want to build, and then we're working our way back to the foundational stuff. And the foundational stuff really has to do with town plans, called comprehensive plans, called master plans, depending upon where you are out there. And then that sets the stage. That's the community discussion. We hear a lot of people going, we should get together and talk about this. That's the town planning process. That's the place you talk. There's already people who it's on their plate to have that discussion. There's mandatory kind of hearings and things. So if you're not in that loop with the Planning Commission, jump over there and get in that loop, because that's the place where they are going to go, how are we going to do this? In Vermont, especially, it's not the place where you talk about whether you should or not, though, because Vermont has a statewide land use goal around providing affordable housing for everybody and providing it in the same place, basically, where you would provide other housing. So it's not, you can't go in Vermont and say, oh, all the affordable housing goes over there, and all the nice housing goes over here. Nope, that's just not something we're going to work on. And you can do that through lots of ways. Again, we will dive deeper into this during the regulations upcoming meeting. But one of the big things is lot sizes, multifamily. We don't need to be having single families, houses in lots of places where we might just want the structure, the look of single family houses, but a lot of them, again, can be duplexes and triplexes. Have mixed use. So oftentimes that's commercial on the first floor, that big white building in the back might be commercial on the first floor, residential on the second floor. For example, these other buildings on the left, this kind of gambrel in the middle, that could easily be a multifamily housing. Again, we've got public parking in the front. That's useful during the day for commerce, and during the night can be used for the residents. We don't have to double up on that. Relaxing those parking requirements. Complete streets is planning speak for all the other parts besides just cars moving around. So we have a crosswalk, we've got sidewalks, we've got pedestrian interconnections between buildings, you name it, out there. Some lighting, so it's safe to walk around. And finally, the growth management, and I think we'll talk about that in a smidge maybe, which is, we're not saying build this everywhere. You've got a cores, use the cores, build there more. In the non-core areas, build some, but there's lots of areas where it's appropriate not to build hardly anything at all, because we have all those other parts of aquifers and watersheds and wildlife corridors and forest blocks that we also want to do. And we can do both, but we have to do them with some serious planning out there.
So Kevin, we have a few questions in the chat.
Wonderful.
Dan McKinley is wondering if town sewer and water have design capacities.
They do have design capacity. So when you build those, and you can look them up actually in the state permits usually, they have a design flow capacity. It's typically in terms of flow, so in thousands of gallons per day. So there is a number there, and you can't go above that. However, there are a lot of things you can do to drive down that flow. A lot of those flow calculations were made, and every time you flush the toilet was like 8 gallons, right? And it can be 2, or it can be 1. Your shower, I'd take like a 3-gallon shower, literally. You don't need to have lots of water coming out of your shower heads. Now our washing machines, again, like 4 gallons for a load of laundry instead of like 40 gallons for a load of laundry. There are lots of ways that we can use our existing capacity better out there in terms of, that's water treatment, right, coming in, and it's sewer treatment going out. Yeah. Next, but you had said you had some more questions, Tori.
I think these are more comments. Liz Ryan Cole says, in New Hampshire, the planning board writes the master plan and improves it, and there's very little input into that.
Right. So in Vermont, the planning commission does it, and then it goes to the select board typically, and the select board adopts it, and you can go to a town vote. In New Hampshire, it's all just stays inside the planning board. And they just move it through. Whereas the zoning in New Hampshire does go to a town vote. In Vermont, it doesn't have to. It does sometimes, but it starts at the planning commission and goes forward there. So there are different people are doing different things in both places, but they're both public processes.
And I can add just a little bit on the New Hampshire side. There is quite a bit of flexibility in New Hampshire about what the town or the master plan needs to include and what the process looks like. And so, yes, there are, communities that will, every 10 years kind of take a look at it and do a little bit to kind of nudge the plan forward. And there's other communities that will, take a look at the plan and be like, this is totally just not what useful for us at this point, and we're going to kind of burn it to the ground and build it all the way back up and do a lot of public outreach and engagement and make it a really impactful document that we're going to use to inform land use regulation updates, our capital improvements plan, that kind of thing. So it is definitely varies pretty widely community by community in terms of what that process looks like.
Right. In Vermont, your plan only lasts 8 years now, and then it evaporates. Your zoning goes on forever and ever, and but it should kind of get updated to conform to your plan as you've changed your plan along the way.
Okay, and then the final comment is water and sewer is great, but from the development perspective, costs to connect have been skyrocketing.
Yes, all costs are going up. That is an issue that has to be addressed. But like many other things in life, you get something when you pay for something. So it's way cheaper to do that than it is to go build, a $20,000 septic system out front and to drill a well and all those type of things out there. So it is a cost. We're in Vermont, we're working on it because if you have sewer and water, there's been a kind of a duplication of a state permit, even to attach to a public sewer and water, as well as a permit from that existing public sewer and water system. So we're trying to do away with that duplication process and the fees associated with that is one thing out there. Any more comments you see right there, Tora? Okay.
Oh, you're all set.
All right, so I did want to just kind of circle back to our metrics here. So we've kind of now been through a thought exercise about how we can add a meaningful number of new homes in ways that are consistent with the character and scale of our communities and neighborhoods. So we want to think again back to these kind of metrics of community strength, tax base, affordability, quality of life, and thinking about how do we check the box with each of these if we're adding more homes in our communities. So first one I want to talk about is strengthening tax base. And one of the common concerns that we hear aired with any new proposed homes or developments in a community, especially those that might be a little larger in scale, is how will this affect tax rates and the strength of the tax base? And it's certainly important to consider the assessed value of new development, but it's also important to consider a holistic approach to analyzing how this contributes to a tax base. So for example, the house highlighted on the left is in downtown Newport, and it's a pretty small lot and has a fairly low assessed value, just under $100,000. And the house on the right is in Enfield, and that's the one we looked at the very beginning. It's a fairly large home on a large lot with a pretty high assessed value, almost $450,000. But we also want to think about the relationship to the surrounding properties and the connection to municipal infrastructure that comes along with these patterns of development. So if we look at 1 acre's worth of these homes in Newport, we're actually getting a much better return in terms of the tax base per acre developed, because we can fit 6 or 7 of these in an acre. So the value per acre of that home, if we take that 1.5 acre lot and look at that value across an acre, it actually comes out to a much higher value on a per acre basis than the home in Enfield, which is about a 2 acre lot. So you're basically in Enfield, you're getting, kind of half a home's worth of value per acre. Whereas in Newport there, you're getting 6 or 7 homes of value per acre. And the reason this is important, well, there's a couple reasons. So the first again, is we have a housing shortage and we want to add more homes. So this is a more efficient way of doing that. Secondly, we want to make efficient use of public infrastructure that serves these properties. And that is where the tax-based considerations also come in. So in Newport, we have a lot of homes hooking into local water and sewer. They're making more efficient use of roadway infrastructure, not to mention they're more walkable to destinations. And while the Enfield home is not connected to local water or sewer, the tax payments coming from that home are probably not going to cover the cost of maintaining and periodically rebuilding the many miles of paved roads that are accessing that property. So when we can develop at this type of scale within our downtown cores, there's kind of feedback loops that come in with that. So you can build more homes, they make more efficient use of the infrastructure, and that is going to help contribute to a stronger tax base versus a little bit more of a dispersed pattern that similarly may use public infrastructure, but just in a less efficient way.
Alex, we do have a question from Rich Brown. Should people consider assessed value per acre, especially after subtracting current use?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if current use would come into play as much, obviously, in the downtown area, because you wouldn't be putting those properties into current use. And, I think it would, for the more rural areas, it would just be, that also is challenging in terms of recouping, the value of services provided to that property. But there's also benefits that are harder to quantify in terms of preserving forest areas and things like that. So in terms of a purely mathematical calculation, that is a tricky one. And there's going to be just lots of trade-offs to consider that are both could be tangible numerically and also a little more intangible. But it's a good question to think about. Yeah,
and I don't know, in New Hampshire and Vermont, you're going to need 27 acres if you're going to have a house to put the 25 in the current use. So all these 3 acre, 4 acre, 5 acre lots, those aren't going to give you any farming or forestry potential anyways. They're not going to be in current use in Vermont. And all they're going to do is eat up land. And again, as Alex said, they're probably not paying their way in terms of the roads that are built or going to need to be rebuilt to them. And they're definitely not paying their way in terms of their impact on habitat, because every time we punch one of these out into the forest, there is a cost to the habitat. We just don't pay it. But in that left-hand slide, by building more in there, we have very, very little impact on existing habitat.
And then Ben Frost put in the chat, I'm happy to see the value per acre analysis, which is a useful construct for understanding municipal tax revenue, bang for the land use buck. New Hampshire Housing is planning to continue its work with Joe Minicozzi of Urban 3 to look at the flip side cost per acre of different land uses in some New Hampshire communities. And he put a link to that project in the chat.
Yeah, and I think you may have already recordings, Alex, over there, because you Joe up to do some presentations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and thanks, Ben, for plugging that. It's a really interesting research series, and I have an example from the most recent report that you all did on this slide that I'm going to go over. So this is from a report that New Hampshire Housing did, and there was a kind of a presentation series. They contracted with Urban 3 to take this value per acre analysis and apply it to 15 different towns and cities in New Hampshire, and just take a look at where those communities are seeing the most value per acre. And so this is Lebanon, and what you're looking at is each individual parcel in Lebanon, and the height of the parcel corresponds to the value per acre. And you can take this and look at the type of land use present on there, and you can take away some conclusions about what is kind of providing the most value in terms of tax base. And so a couple interesting things here that we saw is one is that multifamily homes on average are providing a greater value per acre than commercial properties in Lebanon, slightly, but definitely higher. And both multifamily and commercial are much higher than single family homes. So there are certainly some implications in terms of contributing to a strong tax base there. Then if you look at a mixed use property that has residential on top of commercial, that value per acre is really kind of going off the charts. And this is, if you guys know where Salt Hill is in Lebanon, that's this building. It's right off the green. It's a very walkable destination. It's well served by local infrastructure. And so these are producing really tremendous returns for the city of Lebanon in terms of tax value, whereas the single family homes, that math they may be more kind of getting subsidized in terms of the services they receive in terms of roads, water, sewer, and other municipal services, while this is the property doing the subsidizing in this case.
One other thing I should mention, which Joe talks about too, is that building, for example, there that has Salt Hill in it, that's been there a long time. So if we put on our energy hat or our waste hat on, that building is not going to get landfilled very soon. It's been there around. It's got a lot of embodied carbon holding in it. Whereas if we build your standard commercial building, your big box building, that building is going to last for 25 or 30 years, and then we're going to rip it down and build another building. And so we're not paying those costs as a society right now to keep doing that. Obviously, there is a big carbon cost in doing that. There's a landfill cost in doing that. And there's just a little bit of a, to me, New England frugality of just building something and then, kind of tearing it down and building a new one out there that strikes me the wrong way. So over here, so now we're down in Proctorsville. This is a good example of affordable housing out there. Again, we're trying to address the shortage. So we're trying to meet that need out there. And we can, one of the big ways is to think density. If we have sewer and water, we can be looking at density. And what we see in many communities are things like half-acre lots, maybe a quarter-acre lots sometimes in our villages that do have sewer and water. And why is a good question. Why don't we go, basically, whatever you developer can think of putting on this spot, we will take. If there's 5 units, you only can get such a big box on the lot. But if you can put 5 units on there or 10 units on there, let's go 5 and 10 in our villages that are walkable and that have transit stuff again, and that may have available public parking. But you might need to look at parking in your regulations. But again, we think parking is a bit of an overblown boogeyman in there. You can also look at affordability requirements, which we'll talk more about in that other session. But that is things where you give people bonuses, you give people less review in the permit process. There's ways in which you can kind of bump affordability up to the top. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention short-term rentals. Short-term rentals perform a role, but in general, they're really not helpful for affordable housing. And so you can regulate them out or regulate them at least and deal with them appropriately. Accessible transportation is important here. This slide on the right, down there with the green and the blue and then the little hatched area in the middle, shows that if you're spending a lot on your car because your house is way out, you can think of that as a transportation cost, but you can also think of that as a housing cost. If your house was in, you wouldn't be spending all that money on your car driving around. And we have a lot of people, you're not supposed to spend more than 15% of your income on your transportation. So we have a lot of people in the region. In fact, most people in the region are spending more than that because they live far out. And so we know people who are spending 55% of their income on their house and transportation, when those combined should never be more than 45% out there. So again, by having public transit, by having a sidewalk to a place, by providing that sidewalk as a public amenity, you can lower the price, the effective price of occupying these structures. I think, oh yeah, the walkout basement here. So this house is up in Rochester. Actually, it was in Rochester. It's not there anymore at all. So when you're building, again, especially if you're building in downtowns, we don't want to see more impervious surface. So even if we have a built environment and we want more stuff to go in there, You don't have to make anything more paved. Use existing pavement. Use the footprints you have. We have flooding as our number one threat. I deal with flooding a lot. This building on the left was not in a flood zone when it was built, but the flood zone came over and took it out. And we've since bought this house and it has gone away. But you want to take this into account when people are building. So we want to think about all those areas out there where we shouldn't be building. We want to think about farm and forest conservation, right? The earth is not getting any more farmland and is losing it by the football fields every second. So let's try to keep our farmland out there. And our forests do many things. They're carbon sink, so we really like that. They need to be relatively intact big chunks. If you just put one road through it, or you put a couple big houses up on a hill, it still looks like a forest, but functionally to the critters that live there, you can take away a lot of that habitat value. In fact, you can take away all the habitat value for certain species just by a little intrusion in there. So you have to factor that in. And again, nobody's paying that right now, but there is a cost to the systems out there. And so you can restrict development in your planning and zoning in those sensitive areas through creating overlay districts, doing mapping exercises. There's a whole variety of stuff we could go on and on and on about how you do that out there. But overall, we still think you can put a lot more development on the land in places, even in rural places, in a smart way so that we can help solve this problem of housing. And that's largely going to be solved by building a bunch of new housing.
Kevin, we have a question from Gary Durr. He is wondering how we feel about the major federal funding coming into towns and how that will impact housing in our region.
So there's a variety of federal funding coming in from different parts of CARES Act and previous acts. One of the bits of money that will be hitting all our towns soon can be spent on broadband and sewer and water projects. We know that. And so again, that might be a good spot to go, oh, we really should put a sewer line down this little road over here, or we really need to upgrade our water plant, or we've got an old water line. Woodstock, they just had a water main break the other day, caused all sorts of problems. So there's that money out there. There's also money that's been used somewhat to try to look at doing things like, instead of for homeless populations, instead of putting them up in a hotel and paying that money out the door, there's some big enough money in the current bills where you go, let's just buy the hotel. And then it'll be a public resource for the homeless instead of just paying, constantly to have the homeless stay at this hotel. So some of permanent solutions for some of our homeless population is in some of those bills. There's also a bunch of money in those bills, as Gary may know, for rental and mortgage subsidies for people who've had to miss payments out there.
There's also, right now, communities are being provided with requests for earmark projects through the upcoming federal surface transportation bill. And so, those are awarded, are going to be on a competitive basis, but it's a good opportunity to think about opportunities to put that money towards uses that will enable, more accessible and affordable transportation and be kind of a net benefit in terms of a local tax base and local housing options, as opposed to something that may be kind of a nice to have transportation infrastructure improvement that might become more of an actual maintenance liability in the future. It's tempting to chase that money, but we can end up kind of overbuilt and overextended in some ways as well in the future. So good opportunity, but important to think about, how that money is getting put to use.
Great. And then Joshua Jerome asked, have you ever seen municipal tools such as tax stabilization developed to encourage infill of single family and multifamily construction in downtowns and village centers?
Yes, however, in New Hampshire and Vermont, that's problematic right now. In Vermont, towns are enabled to do that, but basically you just then shift it to other people in the town. So it would take a change in state law in Vermont, and I think it would take a change in state law in New Hampshire, both of which we're advocating for. And the boiled down, simplified version of that is if, well, actually just jump to the next slide, Alex, and that'll be a kind of a visual example of it. So let's say that this little white house with the black attic on the left there is a place, but it's kind of all run down. And somebody wants to buy it and they want to fix it up and turn it into a triplex. Right now it's paying a certain amount of property taxes. When they get all done with that investment, it's typically going to pay more property taxes, right? How about we don't charge them that extra property tax? That's like a tax stabilization agreement on a property by property scale, where we say as a public, we want you to do this. If you're doing this to turn it into short-term rentals and just make money, different story. But you're turning this, and maybe we have an affordability cap on some of those things. And in return for that, we don't charge you the new value in property tax. So we're not losing money. We're gaining housing. We're gaining jobs for carpenters. So we're gaining some income tax in Vermont for all those people working on that house. We're gaining sales tax on all the boards and stuff going into that house. So we're even gaining tax value. We're just foregoing some of the property tax value over time, and then we can ramp it up. But that'd be a way to do basically a tax stabilization and get the thing that we want. Yeah.
And then John Burton asks, are there any thoughts on the use of tax increment financing or TIF districts?
Yeah, so you could think of that as a mini TIF in some ways. A tax increment financing district is a tool by which let's say that this looks like a town green in the right hand side of this picture, but let's say this was just a vacant lot that we wanted to do something with, kind of on the edge of downtown. So typically in a tax increment financing district, what you do is you go, we are going to create a district, we're going to draw a line around a special area, and then we're going to put money into making that area worthwhile, and then we're going to pull tax revenue out of that area to pay for the money we put in. So let's say this lot was kind of on the edge of town and doesn't have sewer and water, and maybe doesn't have a great road. We're going to extend the sewer line, we're going to extend the water line, we're going to do some public payments to make this property work more. The developer is going to build a big thing there, and then we're going to take some of that tax value that came from that new building to pay back the specific infrastructure that went into making the lot work. That's how a TIF works. So you could do that, and why in Vermont we cap those things to me unnecessarily because we're trying to keep that, we're trying to not lose too much of that foregone value. However, that value is all theoretical until we actually build it. So why not just have people building it? Again, you don't lose money. The net on TIFs is you make money over time and you get the thing you want. It does require some bonding up front by the town, so you actually need to have some money to put in the sewer and water. Again, the current federal money could be used for that, but we would argue that the feds should keep that pipe going because it's not costing any money. All it's getting us over is the initial capital hump, and that money is all getting paid back by the development.
Great. And then Ben Frost put a great comment in the chat. In New Hampshire, see RSA 79E, the Community Revitalization Tax Relief Incentive. It's a limited time exemption from increases to property taxes associated with substantial rehabilitation of a structure. It's enabling legislation for municipalities to adopt if they so choose. Wonderful.
That'll be great. That'll be good, Ben, so we can come over and beat our legislature on that and go, New Hampshire's doing it. We gotta catch up over there. And in Vermont, I don't know if it's passed this year, but they in the past we've somewhat been limited on TIFs to commercial and mixed use development, and they're talking about expanding it for purely residential development. And so that may be passing. I'm not sure where that legislation is right now. I see we've got 5 more minutes and a couple more slides maybe. So this is just, do you have to build everything in the downtowns and the village centers? And that's not our argument. Argument is it's a bright idea. It saves you money. It's a good thing in lots of ways. It uses your infrastructure. You get more value per acre. You name it out there. It's better for the fishies and the bears to do it. But you can still build some in rural areas. Just understand that there are costs that go with that. And so don't be thinking that that is the optimal type of development that you want versus this picture is much more the optimal type of development for many, many reasons out there. And we have, let's see, again, back to the basics. The plan is where you talk about all this type of stuff, right? It's the discussion. It's the, what do you want to do when you grow up for towns? And it has different names and slightly different processes around there, but it forms the foundation for your later land use regulations. So if you said, oh, we do want to, we want to change the zoning in here, and we want to build less out here, and we want to offer incentives and stuff. Some of those are going to end up in your regulations, but this is the plan is the place you talk about that. Some of those are just going to be, things the select board passes, or, initiatives in the community, or grant funds you're going to go get. All of which, though, can get discussed during the planning process. And many grant funds actually look to your plan as like, well, what does your community think of this? And you just pull out that section of the town plan and you go, we support, rebuilding on this commercial block for affordable housing. And they go, you've already talked about that. That's great. And Alex, do you have some New Hampshire specific comments on this one?
Not too much. I think I mentioned before, there's in New Hampshire, there's quite a bit of flexibility in terms of what the master plan needs to include. There's only 2 required chapters, that being land use and a vision chapter. But many communities will include things like transportation, community facilities, parks and recreation, infrastructure, things of that nature. And so, but like Kevin's saying, it's the opportunity to think about these things kind of holistically. So like, what is, we have a housing challenge, but like, what is the relationship of that to transportation, land use, infrastructure, community services in our community? So it is a holistic conversation, and this is the kind of codified process that is available to every community to have that holistic conversation.
Yeah, and we're here at Alex's shop and Mark's shop. That's one of the things that we do is we help. If you go, well, how would we actually do that? We help those conversations happen. We have one more slide on the tool on the Keys to the Valley, which Alex is going to talk about, and welcome to go see the website. It's great.
Just a quick question from Liz Ryan Cole. Why not require New Hampshire towns to address housing in their master plans?
It's a good question for the legislature. Maybe if Ben Frost wants to chime in on prior discussions related to that. I think there's certainly be some benefits to that. I think hasn't been the New Hampshire way to require towns to do too much of anything in a standardized way. Maybe some of that needs to be looked at, but I think it's certainly a good idea to do it. So one last slide here. As we mentioned, everything that we looked at through this study and initiative is available on keystothevalley.com. We lay out a toolbox with strategies and actions, and you can kind of see a flow chart here on the left. And this is kind of a good way of looking at all the different concepts that we covered today, and we'll cover in some of the other presentations, how they kind of come together in terms of starting from an action area and an objective and boiling down to specific strategies and tools. That is what we hope will be a great resource for communities to reference in thinking again about what are some of the tools that are already available to us by the fact that we are a municipality. What are some things that we could incorporate, and who could we pull in as partners? So we encourage folks to take a look and be in touch with questions or thoughts about what you see on the website. There's also a lot of good just general guidance materials related to planning best practices around housing. We have, for example, we have a municipal regulatory self-audit that you could complete to track progress on related to certain goals you might have in your community around housing. And we also have some research reports and data available on the as well to look at different conditions, demographics, things of that nature, including projections of housing demand for each community in the region. So we encourage folks to check it out.
And we may have mentioned some terms today, like form-based code I mentioned earlier. So anything like that, where there's a particular term, we have a glossary at that website, and so you can click there, and then you go to a whole website and a whole organization that's dedicated to talking about form-based code. So you can keep driving through as deep as you want, but you don't have to if you don't want to. And that toolbox, if you select toolbox in the website, you can then select, oh, I'm a developer, I'm a planning commission, and it'll point you to the various separate parts of the website that are probably most helpful without you having to just paw all the way through it. So we've tried to pre-digest the many ways in which people's minds think and can access the information.
Awesome. I know it is a little bit after 1, but we are able to stay on to answer further questions, but a recording of this will be on our YouTube page. I do have one question in the chat right now from Joan Collison. Is either state considering legislation to deed or second/multiple home ownership homes that sit unoccupied much of the year? So second homeowners.
To do what with them?
To deed or second and multiple home.
Oh, deter.
Yeah.
Oh, deter. I don't think either state is thinking of that. In Vermont, second homes do get taxed slightly differently than primary homes. There is a different tax structure in Vermont when you transfer a home. So if a home is being sold to a person who's going to be living in that home full-time versus it's being sold as just somebody's vacation home, you actually pay a different tax rate on that particular thing. So there is a little bit there. There's not a lot. And that tax money then goes back into the planning and zoning and affordable housing world in Vermont. There has been talk about increasing the tax on higher value homes. So maybe homes over $1 million or something would pay just a higher tax across the board. But in general, there hasn't been any. There's been more around short-term rentals, and I'm sure we're going to see even more around short-term rentals. Like one of the things Joe has mentioned is short-term rentals drive up the price of regular houses, right? Because you can make more on a house if you don't treat it like a house, but you treat it like a hotel. But we tax them like a house. Why not tax them like a hotel? And then we can get that value back out, because again, the value that's being pulled out of that structure is mostly made in that structure by the public, right? The reason you're renting that house is because it's a nice town to live in, nice woods around, and all of those other things that were made by the public in part. We should. This slide is just to thank all the people who've helped us out there. We have lots of advisors who we call up and say, what do we need to do about this? And then we've had a pile of funders along the way, some big, some small. Our biggest funder has been the 3 regional planning commissions, where we actually use some of our own dollars to make this thing happen. And then the state of Vermont's community development block program. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't mention those two.
Great. So if anyone has any further questions, you can type into the chat, or you can hit the reactions button on your screen to raise your hand, and I can call on you.
Yeah, we can stay a little bit. Can you stay a little bit, Alex?
I do have a meeting right after this one, but if we get too far on, I'll just say goodbye and leave it to you.
So are there things out there, Tori, that you need to ask us, or?
Nope, I'll just mention I put in the chat the link to the website and also a link to future events. We're going to be holding a noon webinar every Wednesday this month on a variety of different topics.
And again, those are our contacts to the left by Regional Planning Commission. If you end up at the wrong one, we'll send you to the right one. Don't worry about it.
Otherwise, there are no hands. Is registration limited to these webinars? It is not. We can have as many people as we like. But otherwise, there are no hands and no questions. Lots of thank yous.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everybody for coming.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
But you're all out there.
Hope you will join us at one of the upcoming ones.